And here we go, another episode of the Suppress Herald podcast. And it is Sunday, the 11th of August. And I just had a little hiatus for a real vacation, took a little time off, and right back at it. Once again, the Suppress Herald is a synopsis of what happens in our local newspapers here in Maine, which is synonymous with what happens in local newspapers across the country, pretty much. And our papers in Maine were almost all of them bought by the National Trust, they call it, for local news. It's a billionaire, tech billionaire owned group of newspapers, and they're buying up newspapers across the country and turning them into, well, taking over the propaganda machine and making it a national organization to control what we hear and see and think. And so today is going to be a little different. Today's podcast, and typically I've taken a week's worth of newspapers and summarized it and kind of picked out the obvious propaganda going on and the slant in the newspapers. We continue to see, over the last couple of weeks, I took a quick run through, and we continue to see that the editorial page is about 9-1 liberal versus conservative letters to the editor, editorials, anti-Trump versus call it anti-Biden, now Kamala Harris, or anti-Republicans versus anti-Democrat, whatever you want to describe it as. It is slanted, biased, and really a danger to our whole country when the media that's supposed to be keeping our public officials, our government honest and protecting the people is kind of doing the opposite. And today, a little different. I'm just going to take Sunday's paper today, just the one day's paper, and kind of go through and see just how ridiculous and how obvious and how common sense it is to realize that these newspapers are nothing but the Suppress Herald. And, I remind people that politics is local, and as we are seeing, so is propaganda. And it has a really negative impact on what people see, hear, and ultimately think about these very important issues. And just to write off, this is the Sunday paper, and they have their opinion page, which is multiple pages of letters to the editor, editorial, and it's right on the front page. And I'm just going to show this. Here it is. Tim Walz, the vice presidential pick by Kamala Harris, with Tim Walz is a regular guy. That's just what Harris needs, a regular guy. And you go through this entire article, and it's just basically covering up for what everybody that pays any attention knows is that Tim Walz is an extreme liberal, just like Kamala Harris, and they are an extreme liberal ticket. Not to mention, there are some serious issues with his military service. There are people that are basically saying he's stolen valor, and these are facts. These are not conjecture or accusations. These are proven facts. He claimed that he retired at a rank that he did not achieve. He temporarily had that rank. He did not complete schooling to become that rank. And so he retired at a lower rank and then has been continuing to claim that he was at that rank. He said he was the highest ranking non-commissioned, officer in the Congress when he was a congressman, which we are finding out is a lie. Not to mention, when his unit was deployed to Iraq, he bailed. And they keep spinning this around and spinning the facts, but the fact is, he found out, he knew that his unit was going to be deployed to a military and to a combat role in Iraq, and he is a yellow bellied coward who ran away and said, I'm going to run for Congress. This is not what real men do. This is not what real American patriots and military leaders do. Bail on their entire squads, their entire, command when they're deploying to combat in Iraq. He ran away. There is not a single peep in any of this crap. All this does is try to cover up for what he is truly, which is a dyed in the wool liberal. His policies, his positions in Minnesota, where he was a congressman and now is the governor, are very much laid bare if you have the courage and then the ability to go and look at real news. But it's not here, not in the Suppress Herald. This is a cover up. This is propaganda at its worst. And there's this whole article about how wonderful this guy is, and he's this Midwest, you know, dyed in the wool guy, and doesn't talk about his military service, which has been extremely called into question. It also does not talk about his absolute abject failure in the riots of 2020 when Minneapolis was burned to the ground, many neighborhoods, businesses destroyed, lives lost, murdered, whole blocks of the city burned to the ground, a police station overrun and destroyed, which has not even been reopened or built back. Police have bailed and they're short on policing, and Minneapolis is a disaster from a criminal aspect, from a policing aspect, and none of that is here. This is just covering up and trying to gloss over and use pure propaganda to avoid having people know what this guy is all about. Then you get into the inside of this paper, and it just continues the same stuff. Get kids their summer meals, whatever it takes. Only 15% of Maine students who get free meals during the school year get them in the summer as well. That has to change. We have to feed kids year round now. I think that's food stamps. I think there are multiple ways to do this, but it's you know, liberal position. Then you've got a housing situation in Maine, and here's the title of this one. NIMBYs, not in my backyards, think they're protecting Maine, but they're mistaken. People who shoot down affordable housing are standing in the way of myriad benefits of economic diversity starting in schools. The liberal machine is trying to take over the suburbs and rural areas in our country by forcing towns and cities across the country to build affordable housing, low income housing, Section 8 housing. What they don't tell you is a lot of this is not low income housing, it's no income housing. And as you might imagine, no income housing comes with a lot of crime and a lot of costs and a lot of negative. And it is not, providing free housing to people is an answer for anybody. It doesn't help the people that are there. Those housing developments generally turn into hellholes, crime-ridden hellholes, and all the rest. Let me tell you what works. Things like Habitat for Humanity, where people help build their own home and they own it. Home ownership. There are a lot of people that are low income that are in, and give it to Jimmy Carter. He was a champion of this, major champion of doing Habitat for Humanity. It is a really powerful model. Building houses, the people that build these no income or low income housing are developers that get massive tax breaks and get massively wealthy. And nobody talks about that. And the towns that end up with these no income housing developments end up on the hook for all sorts of things. Go right over here. You end up having to pay for kids' lunches, not only in school year, but year round. Talk about bankrupting rural towns that are already struggling. This is liberalism, and it is a disaster. And here we have it every day in the Suppress Herald. And of course, it's let me tell you what the Democrats are down to for this election. They're trying to say that, oh, we need to, I heard Kamala Harris was out in Arizona and had a speech. And in her speech, she said we need immigration reform. Liberals' idea of immigration reform is amnesty for 15 to 20 million people, which means they're Democrat voters. And when you do that, you end up incentivizing millions more to come. And it is a never ending open the spigot. It's way back, most people don't remember this, but Ronald Reagan signed immigration reform, which is just what they're trying to do now. Part of that deal was closing the border. The Democrats and liberals got their amnesty, got their new voters, never closed the border. What happens? All of their relatives, they become anchors, all of their relatives, all their friends back home in all the countries across the world. Hey, I got the free deal. Why don't you come? They'll give us another free deal in 5 or 10 years. And that's exactly where we are. This is a never ending cycle that has nothing but bad results. And everybody is figuring that out. So now they're trying to say, oh, we're for immigration reform and, stopping this uncontrolled border. The border czar who failed at her task majorly and has been an absolute disaster is pretending to get elected that she's going to fix the border. So we've got, back to what all that's left: immigration, uncontrolled borders, the economy, international, peace and diplomacy, foreign policy, abject failure of the Biden Harris administration. The media, the propaganda machine, doing everything they can to cover that up. And all they've got left as actual, you know, policies that they can push to try and get elected: two things: climate change and abortion. Kill more babies, save the planet. And that's what you're going to see. That'll be at the top of everything in these opinion pages. Guaranteed there'll be a climate change, which is what I'm getting to. Climate change requires immediate investment in clean energy. Senator King is still right for the man for the job. King has been an active member of the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus. So there you go. Most important election issue is climate change. Then you have one other letter to the editor. So actually, 3 climate change letters to the editor that were published. Trump's love of Putin appears unrequited. So basically going after him for being Putin's friend. Putin does not want Trump elected. I can tell you that. Neither do the Iranians. We're finding out the Iranians, there's an article in the paper about the Iranians hacking the Trump campaign. And then you've got the Tesla goes further than story suggested. So this is really about the sustainability, the electric vehicle. The Teslas go further than you say. Now, they're not in cold weather, not necessarily if you're going on above 55 miles an hour. So it'll take a long time to get where you're going if it's more than just driving around town. So there we have just the editorial page. And one more: despite what you may have heard, Harris was black on day one. The New York Daily News. Harris is half black. Her father, but she's not an African American. Her father was Jamaican. Her mother is Indian. And she used to tout her Indian heritage, and there's all sorts of media out there to show that. Trump brought it to their attention, and they're all going crazy about it, calling him a racist and everything else, which is predictable. But, you know, this is not about race, this election. This election is about the economy and our country and international. We're looking at World War III. We're looking at being overrun with illegal immigration to the level of we've never even dreamed of. And we're looking at people can't afford homes, people can't afford groceries, and it's a disaster. Crime, cities basically collapsing, look like third world, stores closing, pharmacies closing in a lot of these cities. San Francisco, you can't find a pharmacy. Half of them have closed. Grocery stores closing. Hotels just pulling the plug, saying we're not going to pay our mortgage anymore and walking away from two of the top hotels in San Francisco. This stuff is just horrific. But you don't read about it here in the Suppress Herald. All you read about is how wonderful Kamala and you know we got Tim Walz is just wonderful and this Midwest guy. And it's just same old crap. That's just the opinion page. So they're in full high gear because the reality is this is going to take a propaganda, I don't know, almost a propaganda miracle, although they've got it well established. The mainstream media and local media, and you've also got social media are just in high gear, high gear, trying to put lipstick on this pig, which is the Kamala Harris, Tim Walz team running to run our country. They're not going to run our country, they're going to ruin our country. Let's continue because we know that these people are also anti-Israel and pro-Hamas. And this is almost despicable to me. This is the headline in the world section of the Suppress Herald today, Sunday, August 11th. Israel strikes school in Gaza, killing at least 80. The building had been turned into a shelter for refugees. So, an Israeli airstrike at a school turned shelter in Gaza early Saturday, killing at least 80 people and wounding nearly 50 others. Palestinian health authorities said. Well, haven't we learned by now? This has been repeated over and over in the Israeli Palestinian conflict. The whole thing with Hamas, we've seen propaganda from Hamas. They have a propaganda machine. And our mainstream media is really willing to just go along and be a participant in this absolutely horrific propaganda. We know now because we've been provided with pictures and videos and all of the evidence, and even mainstream media has had to report on Hamas hiding out in tunnels under hospitals, using hospital basements for basic control centers, storing weapons, holding hostages, the same with schools, and using human shields, their own people. We know that. It's been proven. We had a rocket that was blamed on the Israelis that went off in a hospital parking lot and killed a handful of people. And the media came right out and said it was an Israeli rocket until it wasn't. Drive-by media made everything look like that was the case. That was the headline until we figured out that it was actually a Hamas rocket that misfired and landed in their nearby in their hospital parking lot. We didn't see the retraction or the correction in most papers like this Suppress Herald paper. We only saw that headline. This will happen again. This whole story, nowhere does it have the Israeli Defense Forces version of this, which I have read and seen on alternative sources of media, that this was being used by Hamas as a command center. And they say they did a strategic and surgical strike and took them out. But our media continues to just buy into this from the Palestinian health authorities said. We'll find out. I almost guarantee you down the road that story will change, but it will not be in the Suppress Herald. Here's another one. Ferguson officer injured in protest. The demonstrations honor the 10th anniversary of Michael Brown's death. Remember, Michael Brown started the riots in Ferguson where they burned down Ferguson, whole city. Don't forget Black Lives Matter, and George Soros has funded Black Lives Matter activists, streamed into Ferguson and turned it on fire and burned it down. And you have in this story, the team of officers went out to make arrests Friday for destruction of property at the police station where protesters gathered to remember Michael Brown, the unarmed black 18-year-old who was killed by Darren Wilson, a white police officer, in 2014. Darren Wilson was tried by Obama's Justice Department. They took him to court and he was found not guilty. They ruined his life. He was defending his own life from a guy who was twice his size, who had reached in the car, punched him, grabbed his gun, and fired his weapon, fought with him. Michael Brown then ran away, turned around and charged him, and that's when he opened fire and killed him. This all came out. Don't everybody remember, hands up, don't shoot. Except that never happened. This whole thing was a fraud. Michael Brown was a criminal who went into a store, punched a store owner, and stole merchandise. And when this poor Darren Wilson, trying to enforce the law, confronted him, got into a scuffle, and then had to defend his own life. If Michael Brown had charged him, had tackled him, had gotten his gun, who thinks Darren Wilson would be alive today? This whole entire Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 that started all these riots, did billions of dollars, was a lie. And now we're 10 years later, we're going to perpetuate the lie. The readers of this crap called a newspaper never get the information they need to understand what actually happened. Propaganda at its absolute worst. And then we have the front page of the Maine Sundry Telegram, which is the Sunday version of the Suppress Herald. In the fight for more housing in Maine, one barrier rises above the rest, us. Yeah, we have a housing crisis, affordability. Nowhere in this article is it talk about thousands of illegal immigrants who somehow are housed at our expense, I'm sure. First, they were housed in hotels. We had 8 hotels in Portland, South Portland, right here in Scarborough, where they were housing hundreds, if not thousands, of these illegal immigrants, and on our dime. And now it seems they're all housed. But we have a housing crisis. This is a housing crisis of the liberals' making. Liberalism is the problem. They have rules and regulations that prevent developers from building affordable housing. It's no longer affordable by the time you pay all the fees, go through all the process, get all of the permitting, do all of the things they require. In Portland, if you want to build a apartment building, you have to have a percentage of it be affordable housing, and they tell you how much you can charge for rent. It's basically rent control. And if you don't do that, you have to pay something to the tune of $150,000 per unit as a penalty. These rules and regulations, it's basically social engineering, have never worked. They never will, and they keep doing it. And now Biden wants to have a national rent control program. This will not work. It never has. Somebody should figure that out and stop it. If there's a demand for affordable housing, there will be developers, and it's the American way. We'll find a way to do it. There's new technologies with prefab, either panelized construction or whole unit construction. There are ways to build affordable, very high quality, low energy efficient housing. But it will not happen with liberals in charge because their rules, their regulations, and their requirements make it impossible to be an entrepreneur and to do the work that needs to be done to answer this. And again, things like Habitat for Humanity, we have Habitat for Humanity here in Maine, but it's not going to have an impact as much as it could if they adopted that kind of model and allowed people to participate in building their own house and owning their own house. There's nothing like home ownership. You're going to take care of it. You're going to control it. You're going to make sure that your neighborhood where you own a house is managed. But home ownership's out. The other thing I want to talk about with affordable housing in this country and the housing crisis, BlackRock and their like multiple, billions of dollars are being spent by these investment banks to buy thousands and thousands of single family homes and turn around and rent them. Why are rents so high? Maybe because BlackRock bought up all the housing and now control the market. Again, BlackRock bought off the libs. DEI, remember? Didn't earn it. That's what DEI stands for. And DEI, they were trying to, BlackRock using their financial leverage as owning stock in all of these corporations, forcing them to adopt didn't earn it policies. And as a result of that, companies go and bust everywhere. So BlackRock is a darling of the left. They're also all in on climate change, probably because BlackRock is invested in carbon offsets. And they're going to make billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars, selling to the suckers that are buying carbon offsets to make themselves feel better that has no impact on the planet. The whole DEI thing, this is liberalism on steroids that's ruining everything it touches. And I'll finish today. That's just one day's newspaper, today's podcast. And there's nothing in here that's offsetting that anywhere. This is propaganda on steroids as we go into the last few months of an election. And it's only going to get worse. So back to the, didn't earn it, BlackRock and liberalism, it all is tied together. There's an article in here, Coffee by Design closes its India Street locations. I've been saying this to friends for a while. The owner of a local Coffee by Design, they had 4 coffee shops. They started as a coffee shop in downtown Portland, Maine. And then they got into roasting, and now they're selling roasted beans, roasted coffee in grocery stores, in other coffee shops. They sell to coffee shops. There's, hundreds of locations where they're selling their roasted coffee. So now they're basically a coffee roaster more than a coffee shop company. But I've said, one, the owner of this business is a flaming extreme liberal who is, I'm sure, has Trump derangement syndrome and is all in on didn't earn it and all the rest. She also voluntarily unionized her coffee shops. This is in this article. So this goes through and talks about Coffee by Design started doing business in 1994 and one of the earliest and most progressive fair trade coffee shops in Portland. Its roastery, which sells coffee beans to over 600 businesses and has an on-site cafe, is located 1 Diamond Street in Portland's East Bayside. In April, Coffee by Design became the first independent coffee shop in Maine to have ratified a contract with the labor union after it reached an agreement with a recently formed union of baristas. Lindemann, the owner, told the Press Herald last year that the unionization efforts were not the cause of the shop closures. Uh, I told people when I saw that they'll close all their stores. And here we are. 3 out of 4 are closed. The one that's open is where they do the roasting. It's their main center, and doesn't cost anything really to have a little space on the side where they actually serve up coffee. Most of the business is roasting, packaging, shipping beans, and coffee all over. This is woke is broke. And it just plays over and over again. Woke is broke, and we see it again here. And it is, you know, oh, that's not the reason I closed the stores. You can't run a small business like that with unionized labor. It's an entrepreneurial business. You need to have some flexibility. I'm not saying you should be able to abuse people or take advantage of them. If you're a good business, you don't. You treat people well, they treat you well, and everybody thrives. That doesn't happen once you get into a situation like this. And I guarantee you, this woman is a extreme liberal and probably very, very difficult to work with. She's angry, she's mean. That's what liberals are. And now 3 out of her 4 stores are closed, including one at LL Bean. She blamed it on a reorganization or a major remodel they're doing at their store in Freeport, Maine. But if it was a good relationship, they would have accommodated, I'm sure, having coffee by design, have a coffee shop inside the store. I don't know that, but I can tell you, I wouldn't want this woman anywhere near my business. So here we are. Woke is broke. And once in a while, you have to figure it out yourself because they come right out. When they tell you, oh, it wasn't because of unionization, it was because of unionization. So that's just Sunday, August 11th, here in Portland, Maine, the Suppress Herald, full on steroids propaganda. The people that run that, whatever you want to call it, rag, are activists. Liberal, extreme activists. They will never provide balanced reporting. There you have it. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, politics is local and so is propaganda. Thanks for listening to the Suppress Herald podcast.